So what I'm going to do is, I've been at NGA now since last July. So a little bit of a report card on where we are with the change from what was the Innovision organization to what's becoming NGA Research. I'll explain some of the rationale and then the opportunities for you to bring ideas to us and really to be a very active partner in helping NGA meet the future. So very purposeful change. In one line, I guess, is establishing R&D as a strategic priority for NGA and taking ownership of the transition of technologies into practice. So let's see how we get there. When I came to NGA, came as an IC officer and coming from IARPA. So as Stacy Dixon mentioned earlier, peer-reviewed publications are a big deal. Doing good science is very important. Getting that peer review check is very important. But we're IC officers first. So when we do something, when we choose to do it in public or not, that's a conscious decision based on the IC mission. And we're scientists second, which means we have the role and responsibility for deciding what to do, doing it in the right way, and doing it rigorously. So you'll hear the term how am I questions come up from me again too, just as it is with her. My guiding structure, I can do this, here we go, these two clocks. So this is true before I went to IARPA as well. These two clocks, especially the one on the left, which is the Harrison 1, changed the world. So that clock was leading edge science and technology for its time. They literally didn't know how to build it. They didn't know how to build the springs. They didn't know the science of how springs worked to make this happen. And this was Harrison, a clockmaker, over his entire lifetime, beating on the establishment to give him a prize for solving the longitude problem. Okay. He didn't get the prize, he got the money a few years before he died. But that's what happens when you take on the big change. So for me, this is that clock on the left, Harrison 1, that's what we do in R&D. Our job is to make this Rube Goldberg-like device work. That filled a room underneath the poop deck on a sailing ship. It can handle humidity, it can handle the turns, it can handle all the things that come with being on a sail ship. The one on the right, Harrison 4, by that point, there were a number of commercial competitors. That's a giant fob watch, basically. But it gave us precision navigation. Oh yes, it was driven by national security that got us to this point, got him to that point at that time. So what I found, I'm going to go through now a bit of a scorecard then. So what I found when I came to Innovision, a lot of good people, very good people, scientists, technologists, tended to do what I would call, coming from an ARPA, advanced development, leading edge stuff, but tend to do advanced development, tend to be inward focused, try and do it in-house. And that doesn't scale, right? You can't be world class in many things at the same time. People in NGA have heard me say this far too many times now, but there's a quote from Bill Joy, the founder of Sun Microsystems, and it doesn't matter where you work, most of the smart people work elsewhere. And absolutely true, especially segue into an area like GEOINT, or geospatial intelligence, where we all talk about darkening skies, everybody putting birds up there. We talk about analytics as well now. Everyone's offering different types of apps, different applications, doing the things that a decade ago, or certainly 2 decades ago, would have been in-house government purview. So that's going on. GEOINT also, again, coming from outside, the GEOINT definition was a bit narrow. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But GEOINT doesn't mean, geospatial intelligence doesn't mean just those things you can see from above. There's a lot more involved in knowing the Earth and understanding the world. And it's beyond simply things what you can perceive from above. There's a limited number of transition successes in-house. In fact, that's true and not true at the same time. A lot of the old NGA R&D group work had been transitioning into practice, had been helping the mission, but it was being done on a more piecemeal basis, working with colleagues in the other directorates, the other components of NGA, to make things happen. So it was going on, but those big things, the things you want a strategic R&D group to do for you, were not going on. And lastly, an organization, if you're a company and you don't have strategic R&D going on, if you're a technical company, you will fail to differentiate from your competitors, and you will go out of business or get bought. In our world, if we're not, so I mentioned, as we all know, there's so much going on now in the commercial space relevant to what we do. If we aren't shaping that, actively shaping it, investing to change things, building around it, helping to direct what's going on outside, especially from an R&D perspective, then we're just followers. And the same things that we can buy, the same data that we can buy, the same applications that we can buy, can be bought by anybody. Okay? So knowing vulnerabilities, knowing successes, we don't want to be just followers, and that's where strategic R&D comes in. The third thing I found was that I have a director and a deputy director who get it, and that's, you can't say enough good things about what that means. We have strong mission-focused R&D people inside the group and throughout the agency. So as a realtor would say, the bones were there to make something happen, and the top cover was there to give us a chance to do it. Okay, now, so moving on to NGA research. So precepts, you can read these as well as I. So the big deal is to bring to the mission powerful new capabilities and knowledge, and bring that from anywhere. This is the attraction of working in an ARPA. You don't have a mission of your own except to do R&D, so you exist to find something out, to make something happen, and to transition it into practice. We at NGA are on the other end of that. I don't care where it comes from. Right? I shouldn't care where it comes from. If it will give us a world-leading capability to our customers, I should be interested in it, and we should take advantage of it. We should also test it, of course, too. So Stacy mentioned a large percentage of the IARPA budget goes for rigorous test and evaluation, very purposefully. Gold data sets being published for anybody to use and publish against, things that we can use too. And NGA actually has a very deep culture and a lot of gold standard sets to work with as well. The moving from this inward-focused to outward-focused way of doing business is just a minor thing. It's a little change in practice, right? And you all know how easy it is to change culture. So that's what's been going on over this last year. Structural changes as a visible component to it, but internally, working hard with people really coming to understand what's possible in a strategic R&D group. I'm usually asked to compare it to an IARPA or DARPA. One thing on one side is, having worked in both of them, you're ephemeral. In those organizations, you come in, leading edge ideas, leading edge technology, you're a scientist. Your job is to drive the field for 4 years or whatever, and then leave. So you get used up and pushed off to the next one. And then your organization picks up more people as they go along, so it stays on the leading edge of things, and that's by design. We are closer to an AFRL or perhaps NSA research. We have young scientists we want to bring through and give them careers, let them be scientists, let them also work with the outside, let them have the pleasure and the satisfaction of knowing they shaped something and then moved it across to the mission. So I'm going to come back to that again too. A bit different, again, maybe closer to, again, AFRL, Air Force Research Lab, or NSA research in terms of structure. Now, foci, automation, ABI, activity-based intelligence, observation management, other forms of automation, tools for dealing with this massive amount of data that's coming from the outside and coming from inside too. there needs to be acceptance of that, which means we on the R&D side need to show it works reliably, and not just say you should use it. I've been an analyst. It was in that lengthy bio you did, Chris. But if you gave me a piece of software and said, hit the red button, use the result, I don't think so. So it's a question of earning trust, knowing how to sell rock curve results to people who are not coming from the same technical background, building that confidence. And that's going to take time. But we have to solve it because the volume is already too high of information coming in, and our aspirations are high too. Second, transition. We can't toss something over the transom, regardless of where it comes from, and hope they pick it up. The only thing I've seen work in a company, big company, was to move people at the same time. So one of the aspects of NGA research moving forward is we will move people too, with technology, into the operational side of the house for a period of time with other resources to give it a chance to really take hold. And if it doesn't, and there'll be metrics and decision points in those agreements, then the intention is to say, fine, didn't work out, you can come back if you want to. And we used to call these bungee assignments. But that's really the only way to transition on a repeatable basis. Third, NGA, again, I mentioned this earlier, if you take the notion of GEOINT as things you can see from above, it's not very satisfying. And it doesn't reflect what you see every day out there outside of our walls. It's everything that's cultural, it's mapping of languages, language uses worldwide. It's the things that we care about in other parts of the IC. So what is the state of the aquifers? What are the underground water flows? What's, say, the hydrocarbon reservoirs in this particular part of the world? Deep bathymetry, and so on. There's a lot of other aspects to this. It involves sensors, it involves analytics, but as quoting Director Clapper, and when he ran NGA, everything happens somewhere at some time. And if we take that as the remit, then every type of information is fair game here. And we're not going to pursue it willy-nilly, but we're certainly going to open the aperture and how to bring powerful new capabilities into NGA's customers' hands. Okay, so we have 7 focus areas initially. These areas listed here, they came up from an internal process asking everyone to submit specific ideas, and we had north of 80 actually came in, went through those. There were also a number of National Academy reports on the state of GEOINT R&D. I think every 5 years they do one, and this time we're listening to it. And then OD&I had done a study too, and so on. A lot of good inputs came into this. So this is the first pass going in, these 7 areas. And what I'm going to do is explain 3 of them, examples of 3 of them, in a little more detail. Okay. And these are the 3. So first, geophysics. So I mentioned underground aquifers. In this particular, or hydrocarbon reservoirs. Again, that's the world that I came from in part. This oil and gas exploration company, which thinks nothing. Well, thinks actually a big deal of going down through a couple of miles of water and then 4 or 5 miles of rock, and producing data that people make very high dollar decisions based on. So that's that end of things. A lot of technology out there, a lot of hard science, maybe done by people with really deep pockets, and great work. But also going up through the atmosphere. We worry about gravity. We worry about and think about magnetic field distribution. We're about the ionosphere, and maybe all the way out to geo as well. So that's the remit, that's the scope of work that we'll be getting into in this particular pod. I should say, I'm calling these pods because when we stood it up at NGA, I was culture change thinking. I was very concerned that people would say, office, branch, section, we know what those are. So I called them pods, which I stole from NSA, and no one knew what it was. So it's It's a small group of people led by someone who's been technical, but is now in the role of mentor and manager, not merely supervisor, and not competing with people in the pod. And then from there, some people doing active science of their own, but also working with other groups and other places. So that's the notion of a pod. So next. One more. I'm told this actually doesn't work. It turns a light on in the back. So it's there's a human in the loop, or two humans, so it's just asking for trouble. So there you go. Perfect. So Stacy Dixon mentioned some of the IARPA investments in doing disease mapping or doing event prediction detection automatically. This screenshot is from an organization called healthmap.org, and IARPA was one of the funders of that, picking up from all manner of sources, not just Twitter feeds, but all manner of sources, to identify where outbreaks seem to be taking place and to be able to map that dynamically in real time. So for us, okay, a bunch of technology has been done now. This is great. We don't need to do it in one little space. But we need to be able to bring that in and make sure that our agency doesn't redo it again, because this is now known. We know how to do it. So this is an example mapping disease vector changes as a function of climate change. Yes, looking for Zika outbreaks, looking for the avian influenzas as they come and go. These things are all piece of this, but also in here, tracking changes in populations. There was a great announcement by Facebook back in February where they're using digital globe imagery, they said this in public, to track where people live, basically around the world. I think their view is, where do we focus our marketing? Again, logical thing to do. And information that we can absolutely use and should be using already. Facebook has a lot more resources than we do, and a lot of machinery to work it. And lastly, in this category, things like I mentioned language mapping. So which languages are used where, for example. And not just waiting every 10 years for a census, but even within that. Maybe mapping other things to do with culture, human culture. So a piece of big iron here. This is the second largest system in the world at Oak Ridge. The other one is the Tianhe 2 in China. So a lot of, again, IARPA experience in the background here. If you were shopping for books at the end of last year for the holiday, and you went on the top 10 list, I think one of them was called Super Forecasters. And that was the book about the IARPA ACE program. And it was the Good Judgment Project results. And they were talking about, how do you detect super forecasters? What's the skill set? Are they trainable? How do you combine judgments to do better than baseline? The science is there now. We know how to do some of those things, and that's a piece of the puzzle. The big iron picture's here because there's a lot of complex machinery around, a lot of models, and we need to take advantage of it. We can take advantage of it. The horsepower is there for us to use. We just need to step up with the appropriate analytics. I've done a talk I did inside NGA pointing out that in terms of data storage and cycles available, compared to a Facebook or any of the large social media companies, we just don't rate. We're not rate. We have our investments focused on what we need to do, but in terms of the numbers that they worry about, we're relatively small. And I view that as an opportunity for us to then turn around and build on that work to do new things for the NGA mission. Okay. Also within NGA research, first we have the Pathfinder team here. Chris? Okay. You can tell he has a bright green bow tie. So Chris Rasmussen, a leader of the Pathfinder 2 program. So this is where we're working entirely in the open. So people are working in unclassified spaces. They're using publicly available data sources, which, as a contrast, so if you talk about things as open source or closed, it sounds important. But if you think of open source as publicly available, that's most of the information in the world. And there's a lot of it, and a lot of it's really well curated. And if you buy it or acquire it and build on it, again, and working entirely in the open, it turns out that for geospatial intelligence, as Chris has demonstrated with Pathfinder 1 and now is demonstrating in Pathfinder 2, you can do some really, really impressive things, again, for the mission. The NGA's In-Q-Tel interface. We're now the second largest, we've been the second largest investor in In-Q-Tel. Again, as you would expect, so much of what we do, building on the comments about Pathfinder, so much of what we do, other people are doing. There's data sources becoming available, the analytics becoming available. In-Q-Tel is a natural place to go to get access to some of the leading edge companies, the new companies coming online with new technology. Very natural fit there. And third, NGA Outpost Valley. So we recognize that again, most of the talent is outside the building, and most of the talent, there's a lot of talent over on the West Coast. And one way to get access to that talent and have them talk to us, again, with this DoD government agency, is to make those personal relationships, to give them access to learn, so they know who we are, we know who they are, we can expose problems to them, we make the relationships. We need to have a footprint there to do that, and NGA Outpost Valley is really gearing up to do that. Okay. So, the good news then, report card-wise, R&D is now a strategic priority within NGA. It's outstanding. We have some great people inside, and they understand that they are both scientists and intelligence community officers as well. There's so much going on outside that we get to work with and take advantage of, to build on, not to build against, to build on, to figure out what we can bring indoors. Metrics as coming into place. I view metrics in terms of transitions of technologies into our operation, into NGA research, as well as out. So I mentioned the out, moving people and technology into the components. On the way in, I'm viewing going to IARPA or DARPA, who don't have an operational mission, and saying, look, this is really interesting technology you've been producing here in this particular program. If you were to do this extra little thing and here's some data sets, it could be really useful over here. So making those transition agreements to bring technology and knowledge across as well. So metrics going in and going out, we're very much in between. And I think Stacy mentioned it, the notion of getting some of our folk out to the ARPAs to do tours as program managers, using their constructs, resources, to do things that are relevant to us too. It's a natural fit, and it's a huge broadening experience that we can give to mid-level junior scientists. Lastly, again, having been in a DARPA and running IARPA for a while, the shameless plug, we're going to become very, compared to what we were, a very porous, a very permeable organization in the sense of people doing joint duty assignments if you're in government with us. We have none in at the moment other than myself. We have to step that up. We have a lot of people out. A lot of smart people are out. And also IPAs and term limited hires. Again, that's the shameless plug part. Very much into that. It's a way of us bootstrapping technology and science, going deep on something very quickly, and we can do that. We have the authorities, and this meeting we're going to hear about Engage as well, which is a whole program inside NGA to set up to facilitate that type of operation. Lastly, this whole thing was only going to succeed with people here and people out there and outside the buildings playing a major role. That's the only way this is going to work. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a few questions for you.
Okay.
All right. So we'll start with the money question. So given the reorganization and the kind of the new prioritization of R&D inside NGA, where do you see the budget for R&D going over the coming years? And I think one of your bosses is out in the crowd, so feel free to.
At least one.
Feel free to say whatever you'd like in response to that.
Sure, and it won't be quoted, right?
No, no one here will repeat anything you say.
Right.
Or we could skip to the next question.
No, I'm fine. So coming in, my first priority was to stabilize the budget. So 16 to 17, making sure that the line is there. But as we show results, so I see money coming in from other sources. I see us as we start to demonstrate results with this new model. I see that line changing. And there are folk from the Hill here too, and I can't talk to them either.
Right, right. So you kind of addressed this, but I want to ask it specifically. So what's the process by which R will determine whether there's like a commercially viable option, right? You kind of talked about the Rube Goldberg and then the more mature clock.
Yep.
What is that process? Is it within individual pods that they make that with your oversight?
Okay. So Stacy again, and I think Brad too, may have mentioned the Hallmeyer questions.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So if you served in one of the ARPAs, you have those questions tattooed on you. And Hallmeyer 2 is, what's the state of the art today? And if you can't answer that and be correct, then you don't have justification for moving forward. So one of the values of proposers' days, or I think they're called industry days sometimes, is that people can come and hear the details of a potential research program and say, oh, this is stupid because we can already do this. And if they're right, I mean, people do sometimes say things that aren't quite so. If they're right, then that program shouldn't occur, right, or without being revectored. At the beginning, the first is culture change. Going through the first year, maybe a little longer than that, as we go through launches of new things, I'm going to be in the middle of that with external advisors, again, vetting the Hallmeyer questions. It's actually, it's a great mentoring opportunity too, to say, no, you haven't answered this question, here's why. And because people, if they haven't worked in that model, you don't get it immediately.
Great. So industry invests in a lot of data sets, kind of gold standard data sets to benchmark things, to calibrate things. If they have something for, detecting objects or for whatever, what's the best way to engage, or is NGA the right place to engage for that sort of thing?
So we will have in terms of splitting up functions, we have the research pods, there's a development arm, and then there's a test and evaluation group, which is primarily development too. But in that group is a place to bring those types of data sets. Again, ground truth is expensive to procure, and Stacey gave the numbers. I use, in IARPA, I use it as a marketing tool, because 10 years from now, people are going to be referencing IARPA data set number 3, and it's apples to apples comparisons on research results, and it's getting the name out there too.
Right.
So absolutely open to that. Test and eval group will be there as a natural resource, but people should feel free to approach any of the pods.
So as a former DARPA and IARPA, you've referenced, kind of the differences a number of times, but I figure I got to give you one more shot at it. So if you were to draw the most kind of clear, succinct distinction between what you're going to do at NGA and what the DARPAs and the IARPAs of the world are going to do, and Stacy kind of talked about the GEOINT investments they're going to make.
Yep.
How would you draw that distinction so that we can go home or go back to our offices and explain it to our colleagues?
The ARPAs have a special place in the federal funding world. Again, the people are by design ephemeral. You have no career there. You don't get to build an empire there. You come and you go. We, on the other hand, have the job of, we have a mission support side too. And we have, and I think we should have, the ability to bring in more junior scientists and give them the beginnings of grow them as scientists and expose them to HARMA questions and other things like that, so they can think about the importance and justification for large projects. It's a tough thing to do. I view us as closer to NSA research or an AFRL model of doing that. People there, they come in for careers and could be in or around research or R&D for lengthy periods of time.
Great, and last question. So you talked about, you had your 7 pods, and one of them was environment and culture.
Yep.
So we have a climate change question. There's been a lot of DoD overguidance, and even by the NIC, there's been a lot of, what's the future impacts of climate change on our global security posture. If climate change is the mother of all risks, how does NGA kind of place that in the environment and culture pod, or does it fit somewhere?
NGA writ large, you have other people you can ask. For me, it's a split actually between geophysics, which is the phenomenology, measure points, sensors, and so on. But on the other side, yes, environment and culture impact. Again, we're not necessarily going to be. In many cases, we do not need to build the models or to do some of the advanced work, but bringing it together, looking at impact on the Arctic, changing access and so on. Classic geospatial intelligence activity, and a lot of pieces come with that. There was a nice publication about a month ago that talked about the impact of the changing distribution of mass on the Earth's rotational axis, which then impacts climate.
And geodesy for targeting.
And geodesy for targeting.
Yeah.
I didn't mention that. You did.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today. And for our last speaker, a big round of applause, please. All right. Thanks.